American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. American-style historical narration script, detailed, historically grounded. The American Revolution didn't begin with fireworks and final speeches. It began with uncertainty, neighbors watching neighbors, rumors moving faster than letters, and a growing belief that the British Empire was no longer listening. By 1775, the relationship between Britain and its mainland colonies was strained past the point of easy repair. Protests had become organized resistance. British officials saw rebellion. Many colonists still hoped for reconciliation, but they were also arming, drilling, and preparing for the moment when politics might turn into war. That moment arrived in Massachusetts. 1. 1775. Lexington, Concord, and the moment the world changed. On April 19, 1775, British troops marched from Boston toward Concord to seize colonial military supplies. At Lexington, they encountered colonial militia. Shots were fired.
The first exchange was small, but it mattered because it crossed a line. The dispute was no longer only legal and political. British troops pushed on to Concord, where fighting continued near the North Bridge. As the British began their return to Boston, colonial militia attacked along the road. The retreat turned into a running battle. By the end of the day, blood had been spilled on both sides, and the colonies had entered open conflict with the British Army. The war spreads quickly. Militia forces gather and lay siege to Boston. Thousands of colonists who had not yet chosen sides are forced to confront a hard question. If the Empire sends soldiers to seize supplies, enforce obedience, and arrest leaders, what future is left inside that empire? In May 1775, the Second Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia. Delegates face an impossible reality. Fighting has begun, but there is no unified national government. The Congress steps into that vacuum. It authorizes the creation of the Continental Army and names George Washington as Commander-in-Chief. Washington's appointment matters politically as much as militarily. He is from Virginia. The struggle will not be confined to New England. It will claim the entire continent's attention. In June 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill erupts outside Boston, with most fighting taking place on Breed's Hill. The British ultimately take the ground, but at heavy cost. The battle proves two things at once. British regulars can be resisted, and this war will be expensive in lives. Even now, the desire for peace has not vanished. In July 1775, the Congress sends the Olive Branch petition to King George III, seeking an end to hostilities and a restoration of harmony. The king rejects it. British policy shifts toward treating the colonies as outright rebellion. By late 1775, the direction is clear. The road has become a war. 2. 1776. Independence and the struggle to survive. Early 1776 brings both urgency and transformation. In March 1776, Washington positions artillery overlooking Boston and forces the British to evacuate the city. The victory boosts morale, but it also reveals the nature of the conflict. Britain can strike where it chooses, and the colonies must defend a vast coastline with limited resources. Meanwhile, political thinking accelerates. In January 1776, Thomas Paine publishes Common Sense, arguing that monarchy and hereditary rule are incompatible with liberty, and that independence is the only realistic path forward.
The pamphlet spreads widely and helps push public opinion towards separation. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopts the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration is a public argument as much as a political act, an explanation offered to the world.
It claims that governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed, and that people have the right to alter or abolish a government that becomes destructive of their rights. The words are bold. The reality is dangerous. Declaring independence does not win a war. It raises the stakes. If the revolution fails, leaders risk being treated as traitors. Britain responds with overwhelming force. In the summer of 1776, a massive British expedition targets New York, a strategic center for controlling the Hudson River and dividing the colonies. The Battle of Long Island in August 1776 becomes a major defeat for the Continental Army. Washington's forces retreat from Brooklyn, then from Manhattan, and later from New Jersey. The British capture New York City, which becomes a major British base for much of the war. For the Revolution, the question becomes immediate and brutal. Can the Continental Army survive long enough for the Revolution to live? In December 1776, Washington takes a desperate gamble. On the night of December 25th, his army crosses the icy Delaware River and attacks Hessian troops at Trenton on December 26th. The victory is small in scale, but massive in meaning. It proves the Continental Army is still alive. Days later, on January 3, 1777, Washington wins another key victory at Princeton. Those two victories help keep the cause from collapsing in its darkest moment. They also show Washington's approach: avoid total destruction, preserve the army, strike when the opportunity is real, and understand that survival itself is a form of strategy. 3. 1777. A war of campaigns, and the turning point at Saratoga. In 1777, Britain attempts to crush the rebellion through coordinated campaigns. One goal is to cut New England off from the other colonies by controlling the Hudson River corridor. A British force under General John Burgoyne moves south from Canada. The plan depends on coordination and support that does not fully materialize. Meanwhile, British forces capture Philadelphia in September 1777 after battles at Brandywine and Germantown. Philadelphia is the seat of the Continental Congress, and its fall is a political blow. But the Congress escapes, and the Revolution's political machinery continues. The most decisive event of 1777 happens in upstate New York. Burgoyne's army meets growing resistance, including Continental troops and militia. After major fighting in September and October 1777 near Saratoga, Burgoyne is trapped and forced to surrender on October 17, 1777. Saratoga becomes a turning point because it changes international perception. To foreign powers, a colonial rebellion defeating a major British army signals that the Revolution might actually win. 4. France enters the war. The Revolution becomes global. 1778. The American Revolution has always been tied to the broader Atlantic world. After Saratoga, that connection becomes explicit and decisive. In February 1778, France and the United States signed treaties of alliance and friendship. France recognizes American independence and commits to the war. This transforms the conflict. Britain is no longer fighting only a rebellion. It is fighting a global rival. Naval power, Caribbean wealth, and European strategy now shape the war's course.
French support comes in multiple forms: money, supplies, soldiers, and, crucially, naval strength. Figures like the Marquis de Lafayette become symbols of Franco-American cooperation. Yet the alliance is not just about romance and ideals. It is about strategy. France seeks revenge for losses in the 7 Years' War and aims to weaken Britain's empire. In 1778, the war's center begins to shift. The British reassess priorities. Maintaining control over the northern colonies becomes costly.
Britain increasingly focuses on a southern strategy, believing there is more loyalist support in the south and that controlling southern ports and resources can strangle the rebellion. 5. Winter at Valley Forge and the problem of building an army, 1777 to 1778. One of the most famous chapters of the war unfolds in winter quarters at Valley Forge from late 1777 into 1778. The Continental Army suffers from shortages of food, clothing, and supplies. Many soldiers endure cold and hunger. Disease remains a constant threat. The struggle is not only against Britain, it is also against logistics, politics, and scarcity. Yet Valley Forge is also a story of training and transformation. Under leadership that includes Baron von Steuben, the Continental Army drills, standardizes tactics, and improves discipline. When spring comes, the army emerges more capable. This is a recurring theme of the revolution. Political ideals must be matched by organization. Winning requires not only courage, but administration. Supply lines, pay, recruitment, and coordination among 13 very different states. 6. 1778 to 1779. The war widens. Naval struggle, frontiers, and new theaters. After 1778, the war spreads across multiple fronts. Naval battles and privateering disrupt trade. The Caribbean becomes strategically vital because sugar islands represent immense wealth and naval staging points. In Europe and elsewhere, British forces must account for French involvement and the possibility of Spanish intervention. Spain enters the war against Britain in 1779, further expanding the conflict's global scope. On the American frontier, fighting and raids intensify in areas contested by settlers, native nations, and imperial forces. Native communities make complex choices, often attempting to protect land and sovereignty in a war that threatens to reshape the continent regardless of who wins. The revolution is not a single, unified civil conflict. It is a multi-sided struggle where alliances shift and local realities matter. Within the colonies, the war is also political and social. Loyalists, colonists who remain loyal to the crown, face suspicion, intimidation, and sometimes violence. Many flee or are displaced. Others fight for Britain. The revolution divides communities, families, and towns. For African Americans, the war opens both danger and possibility. Some enslaved people seek freedom by escaping to British lines, especially after British proclamations that promise liberty to those who leave rebel masters and serve the crown. Others fight with patriot forces in various roles, sometimes with promises of freedom that are inconsistently kept, depending on state and circumstance. The revolution's ideals are powerful, but the reality is uneven and often tragic. The war does not resolve America's deepest contradictions, it intensifies them. 1780. The war turns south. Charleston, Camden, and crisis. By 1780, Britain commits more fully to the Southern campaign. The South becomes the war's most violent and decisive theater.
In May 1780, British forces capture Charleston, South Carolina, in one of the worst American defeats of the war. Thousands of American troops are taken prisoner. The loss is a major blow, and it strengthens Britain's belief that the Southern strategy can work. Later in 1780, the Continental Army suffers another significant defeat at Camden in August. The Southern cause looks fragile. Yet the South is not simply conquered territory. It becomes a landscape of constant conflict, regular battles, militia warfare, raids, and deepening civil divisions. In October 1780, Patriot militia victories such as King's Mountain, October 7, 1780, show that British control is not secure. The war in the South becomes a grinding contest over supply lines, local support, and endurance.
During this period, another shock hits the Patriot cause: Benedict Arnold's treason. In 1780, Arnold conspires to surrender the strategic fort at West Point to the British. The plot is exposed when British Major John Andre is captured. Arnold escapes to British lines. The episode becomes a symbol of betrayal and a reminder that revolutionary loyalty is not automatic, even among celebrated leaders. 8. 1781. From Cowpens to Yorktown, the trap closes. In early 1781, Patriot fortunes in the South improve. In January 1781, American forces win a major victory at Cowpens, January 17th. In March 1781, at Guilford Courthouse, March 15th, British General Charles Cornwallis wins the field, but at heavy cost, suffering casualties he cannot easily replace. In effect, Cornwallis is weakened even in victory. Cornwallis moves into Virginia, hoping to cut off supplies and end resistance. But the strategic situation is changing. American forces under Washington and French forces under Rochambeau coordinate more effectively. The alliance that began in 1778 is now capable of coordinated major operations. The decisive factor is naval power. In 1781, the French fleet under Admiral de Grasse moves into the Chesapeake Bay. At the Battle of the Chesapeake in September 1781, French naval forces prevent the British from controlling the waters and block British relief. This is crucial. Cornwallis positions himself at Yorktown, Virginia, expecting support and evacuation by sea. With French naval dominance in place, that support is cut off. Washington and Rochambeau move quickly. They march toward Virginia and surround Yorktown. Siege operations begin. Artillery pounds British positions. Cornwallis is trapped between land forces and a hostile sea. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrenders at Yorktown. Yorktown is not the end of the war in every corner of the globe, but it is the decisive blow to Britain's political will to continue fighting in North America on the same terms. 9. 1782 to 1783. Peace and the birth of a new state. After Yorktown, fighting continues in some places, and the war remains global. But in Britain, politics shifts. The cost is enormous, and the likelihood of reconquering the colonies appears low. Negotiations begin. In November 1782, preliminary articles are signed, and on September 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris is signed, officially ending the war between Britain and the United States. Britain recognizes American independence. The treaty establishes boundaries that extend to the Mississippi River, though the realities on the ground, especially for native nations, remain contested and often tragic.
Diplomatic maps do not automatically translate into lived stability. In November 1783, British forces evacuate New York City.
The war is over, and the United States exists as an independent nation. Yet independence creates new challenges immediately. How to build a stable government, how to finance a country, how to manage Western expansion, and how to reconcile ideals of liberty with the realities of slavery and displacement. The meaning of the Revolution. The American Revolution is often remembered as a clean story: liberty versus tyranny, independence versus empire. But history is never that simple. This was a war for political sovereignty, and it was also a civil struggle that divided communities. It was a revolution fueled by ideals, and it unfolded inside a society filled with contradictions. It depended on local militia and political committees, and it also depended on a global alliance, naval power, and international strategy. From Lexington and Concord to Yorktown, the revolution was not inevitable. It was a chain of decisions, sacrifices, accidents, and turning points. And by 1783, one truth was undeniable. A group of colonies had become a new state, and the modern world would have to adjust to its existence.